You don't understand this doctrine. I do. You practice wrongly, I practice rightly. You are refuted. Now, when you hear those words, it's honestly hard not to wince just a little bit. I mean, it has the distinct flavor of a furious, polarized thread on social media, doesn't it? It's exactly the kind of absolute certainty and bitter division we see literally every single day online. But here's what's truly fascinating. Those exact words, they were spoken over 2,000 years ago. Human nature and our tendency to just fiercely divide ourselves, well, it seems it hasn't changed all that much.
So in today's explainer, we're unpacking the Pāsādika Sutta. And look, this isn't just some dusty, ancient historical artifact. It is an incredibly meticulous blueprint for overcoming ideological division. What makes this text an absolute masterclass is that it doesn't rely on magic or wishful thinking or just absolute authority to keep the peace. Instead, it offers a deeply pragmatic, structural guide for how any community can survive the loss of a leader, navigate those bitter internal disputes without toxic ego, and construct genuine, lasting harmony right from the ground up.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at 1. The origin of division. 2. A complete, robust community. 3. Resolving conflicts peacefully. 4. Redefining true happiness. And finally, 5. Focusing on the present. Let's dive right in.
Part 1. The origin of division, the death of a leader, and the fracturing of a community.
So let's explore the historical crisis that actually triggered this entire teaching. A really prominent rival religious leader of the era, named Nigaṇṭha Nātaputta, had just died suddenly, and almost instantly his followers just fractured. Without their leader there to hold them together, they turned on each other with what the texts vividly describe as weapons of the mouth, which, by the way, is exactly where that bitter, furious quote from our introduction came from. It was pure chaos. So the Buddha used this real-time crisis to point out the fatal flaw in their structural foundation, drawing a really stark contrast between an incomplete teaching and a well-proclaimed one. Think of an incomplete teaching kind of like a massive, highly successful company built entirely around one uniquely charismatic CEO. The moment that CEO steps down or passes away, what happens? The stock tanks, the board fights, and the company crumbles. Why? Because the structure underneath was completely hollow. In contrast, a well-proclaimed teaching is like an organization built on unshakable core values and functioning systems. When the charismatic leader vanishes, the structure actually survives. The system itself, not just the person at the top, works to bring people lasting stability.
Part 2. A complete, robust community, building the deep-rooted pillar of society.
So what does a completely robust community actually look like in practice? Well, the Buddha was really functioning as an architect of social structures here. He explained that society needs to be unshakable, much like a deep-rooted pillar that simply won't budge, even in a severe storm. And the psychology behind who exactly makes up this pillar is fascinating. True resilience, it turns out, doesn't come from a tiny elite fraction of scholars at the very top. Absolute buy-in is required across all demographics. Yes, you absolutely need the senior, experienced monks and nuns, the middle-level practitioners, and the newly ordained. But crucially, it does not stop with the monastics. The foundation actually requires everyday laymen and laywomen, both those who are celibate and, most importantly, those who are enjoying family life, managing worldly resources, and just dealing with everyday struggles. Because think about it, if a philosophy only works for a handful of elites isolated away in a forest somewhere, it's incredibly fragile. For a community to be truly robust, its core principles have to be effective, accessible, and practiced by the grassroots foundation just as fervently as the leadership.
Part 3. Resolving conflicts peacefully. The protocol for handling internal disputes.
Now, even in the most robust, deeply rooted community, human beings are still, well, human beings. Disagreements are going to happen. Someone is inevitably going to misspeak, misinterpret a rule, or just explain something really poorly. The Buddha laid out a highly precise, 3-step protocol for de-escalating these exact moments, and honestly, it contains some brilliant psychological insights. Step 1. Do not immediately rejoice or reject their words. This goes entirely against our modern instinct, doesn't it? Today, our reflex is to instantly cancel someone we disagree with or aggressively applaud someone on our side. So just taking a breath and pausing that reaction, that is revolutionary. Step 2. Carefully compare their phrasing with their underlying meaning. This is a genius psychological hack for disarming the ego. You know, sometimes people have the totally correct idea, but just stumble over the wrong words, or vice versa. By systematically separating the words from the intent, you completely remove the personal attack. And then step 3. Once you identify the specific disconnect, You just gently guide them to the correct understanding. It's a completely rational process that strips all the toxic defensive emotion out of a disagreement.
And on the flip side of this conflict resolution protocol is a really beautiful rule about validation. When someone actually gets both the intended meaning and the specific phrasing perfectly aligned, you shouldn't just quietly nod and move on. No, the text explicitly says you must openly validate them. You rejoice and actively tell them it's wonderful that they understand so perfectly. Think about our modern culture for a second, where we usually only speak up to criticize or leave a negative review, right? We take good behavior completely for granted. Active, explicit, positive reinforcement builds enormous trust. It reinforces the shared values of the community, and it weaves an incredibly strong, unified foundation that can actually withstand future disagreements.
Part 4. Redefining True Happiness. Worldly Indulgence versus Spiritual Liberation.
During this era, rival philosophical sects would sometimes mock the Buddha's monks. They'd accuse them of being obsessively attached to happiness, using the word as an insult, as if they were just selfishly seeking pleasure. The Buddha brilliantly flipped this critique right on its head by completely redefining what happiness actually entails. He contrasted false worldly happiness with true spiritual happiness. Worldly indulgence is essentially a fleeting sugar rush. It relies on destructive acts like killing, stealing, lying, or just constantly feeding temporary sensory desires. And the moment you get what you want, the hunger returns, often causing harm in the process. True happiness, however, is a sustainable, slow-burn energy source found through disciplined meditation, specifically states known as jhanas. Rather than esoteric magic, think of jhanas as a clear, structural progression of mental upgrades. You start with a joy found in simply stepping back from chaos. Then you move into deep inner tranquility, settle into a mindful equanimity, and finally arrive at a state of pure peace that is totally unshakable by temporary pleasure or pain. He essentially told his critics, yes, we are intensely pursuing happiness for sure, but a permanent one that requires absolutely no destruction. And the profound spiritual rewards of pursuing this deep-rooted happiness aren't just mystical titles. They are literal psychological milestones of becoming increasingly untriggerable. A stream enterer has established a perfectly safe foundation free from falling into lower destructive behaviors. A once-returner has drastically diminished their underlying greed and anger. A non-returner is completely freed from those base emotional fetters that usually control our human reactions. And a fully liberated arahant is completely clear of all mental taints. Now, why does all this matter for community harmony? Because a community made up of individuals who are actively conquering their own inner greed, anger, and ego is a community that simply will not fracture into those bitter, chaotic arguments we see so often. True social peace absolutely has to start with inner psychological liberation.
Part 5. Focusing on the present. Why the Buddha refused to answer unhelpful questions.
To protect this profound peace and keep the community untriggerable, the Buddha had to set incredibly strict boundaries around what his followers actually debated. Rival sects of the time were absolutely obsessed with massive, abstract questions such as, are the self and the world eternal? These questions were essentially the ancient equivalents of digital clickbait. They were topics specifically designed to generate endless debate, outrage, and speculation, but fundamentally incapable of producing actual, actionable solutions for anyone's life. They would also endlessly debate questions like, what exactly happens to a being after death? Do they exist? Do they not exist? Look, the temptation to argue over the unknowable is a deeply ingrained human trait. It feels intellectually stimulating, and it allows us to feel smart. But arguing over mysteries of the afterlife or the edge of the universe is a massive distraction. It pulls all of our vital energy and attention away from solving the real, tangible suffering that is happening right in front of us, right here in the present moment.
And this is precisely why the Buddha famously refused to answer these clickbait questions. Referring to himself as the Tathagata, he utilized an uncompromising three-part communication filter. He stated that the Tathagata only speaks what is true, factual, and beneficial. This is a radical concept, isn't it? Even if a piece of abstract information is technically true and factual, if obsessing over it does not actively and tangibly help end human suffering in the present moment, he simply will not teach it or entertain debate about it. Imagine for just a second if we applied this exact filter to our modern internet. How much of our daily digital communication, the endless hot takes and outrage cycles, would instantly vanish if every single post had to be actively beneficial to ending suffering?
So instead of abstract philosophical noise, he forced the community's focus entirely onto the ultimate grounding mechanism, diagnosing and treating the immediate problem through the Four Noble Truths. This is suffering.
This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. And this is the path leading to that cessation. You don't need a degree in metaphysics to understand this. If a conversation, an argument, or a social media thread doesn't actively help you or your community achieve peace right now through understanding and resolving present suffering, you systematically discard it. This is the final, absolute key to maintaining that truly robust community.
Silence the noise. Focus on the cessation of suffering today. The journey we've taken through this ancient blueprint shows us that true harmony doesn't just magically appear because you have a charismatic leader. Not at all. It is meticulously constructed through a deeply rooted, highly inclusive system that hacks the ego, resolves conflict gently, and ruthlessly prioritizes present compassion over abstract debate. This text leaves us with a deeply profound and provocative question to ponder. In our hyper-connected modern world, which is absolutely overflowing with endless digital debates and ideological noise, what abstract arguments do we need to silence to finally build a robust, peaceful community today? Thank you so much for exploring this text with me. Keep learning and keep focusing on what truly matters.